West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Whether the Republicans end up taking the House with a 5, 6, or even 7-seat majority, those seats were already basically guaranteed to them thanks to gerrymandering, thanks to the fact that they drew their own district maps, boundaries in places like Florida and Ohio to guarantee themselves seats in Congress. But as bad as that is, as bad as the gerrymandering at that level is, it's nothing compared to how GOP redistricting has undermined democracy in state legislatures. Take Wisconsin. You could be forgiven for thinking of names like Paul Ryan and Scott Walker and Reince Priebus and assuming Wisconsin is a red state through and through. But Wisconsin voters sent the first socialist to Congress, Victor Berger, in 1910. And Wisconsin was home of longtime Republican Senator Fighting Bob La Follette, in many ways the father of the American progressive political movement. So what's changed over the past century? In today's Wisconsin, the majority of voters still tend to vote Democrat. They elected a Democratic governor, Tony Evers, in 2018. They voted for Joe Biden in 2020. And last week they voted to re-elect Democrat Evers. But despite all those Democratic votes, Republicans still have not just a majority, but nearly a supermajority in the legislature. My MSNBC colleague Chris Hayes explained how last week.
The people of Wisconsin came out and said, who do we want to govern this state? And by 2 points, the people of Wisconsin said, we would like the Democrat to govern our state. And when those votes were fed into the maps the Republicans themselves had written, what it spat out was near supermajorities in both the House and the Senate for the Republicans with the same votes that got Tony Evers elected by a good margin.
It's crazy, and it's true. To understand why, you have to go back to 2010. That year, the Tea Party movement got Scott Walker elected Wisconsin's first Republican governor in 8 years. And the GOP also got control of the legislature for the first time in over a decade. The following year, that Republican government redrew the state's maps in secret. And in 2012, the map worked brilliantly. Republicans won 60 out of 99 seats in the state assembly and held their majority in the state senate, even though they got less than 50% of all the votes statewide. And the results were even worse in 2018, a Democratic wave year. As Mother Jones's Ari Berman notes, that year Democrats swept all 5 statewide races and won 53% of votes cast for the state assembly, but the party retained just 36% of seats in the state legislature. Wisconsin Republicans have figured out how to make elections voter-proof. It's not just through gerrymandering either. In 2018, when Wisconsin voters ousted Governor Scott Walker and elected Democrat Tony Evers, state Republicans just held a lame duck legislative session to strip the incoming Evers of key appointment powers. Because if you're a Democratic governor, you're basically illegitimate in Republican eyes. Oh, and they also then shortened early voting for all subsequent elections. But wait, there's more. Thanks to the conservative state Supreme Court, Republican appointees have been allowed to stay in certain roles to this day, even though their terms expired, and the Democratic governor should be able to appoint new ones. Wisconsin's gerrymandered maps were also upheld in 2019 by a hard-right U.S. Supreme Court, which later said it wouldn't get involved in partisan gerrymandering anymore. Wisconsin's maps were made even more pro-Republican by the GOP legislature in redistricting last year, and were later upheld by that Republican-dominated state Supreme Court. So that now, despite stinging statewide defeats in 2018, 2020, and 2022, Republicans are still calling the shots in Wisconsin. Last week, they secured a supermajority in the Senate and only narrowly missed out on a supermajority in the House as well by 2,499 votes, according to Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler. According to a Marquette University study, Democrats would now have to win nearly two-thirds of the statewide vote to get half the seats in the legislature. So, serious question. If Wisconsin were a foreign country, would you even still call it a democracy? Joining me now, Ben Wickler, chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Ben, there's been a lot of celebrating this week in Democratic circles, liberal circles, about not just fending off a red wave, but saving democracy in America. A lot of election deniers got defeated. And I worry that in all of our rightful focus on election deniers, we forget about gerrymandering, which is another piece of this anti-democratic puzzle, and Wisconsin seems to be ground zero for it.
It really deeply, profoundly is. By some measures, Wisconsin is the most gerrymandered state in the United States of America. And the reality is that we had one or two wheels off the side of the cliff and were able to swerve barely away from the cliffside. If Republicans had gotten supermajorities in both chambers of our state legislature, they could have rewritten election laws to ensure that, as the Republican candidate for governor here said, Republicans never lose another election in Wisconsin. But yes, we managed to stop them by 2,499 votes in two state legislative districts. That's how close we came, but we did stop them. And that means that there is a thread of hope about what's possible in the future here.
So next April, I believe, there's going to be an election to replace a retiring conservative on the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, which this year alone approved that aggressively gerrymandered Republican map, banned most absentee drop boxes. Things are getting worse, not better. And I wonder, at a national level, I've criticized the Democratic Party for not prioritizing winning court seats or appointing judges at the federal level or electing judges at the state level. In Wisconsin, that's going to be a big campaign for you, is it not?
This is going to be a massive election, and it's really second in importance only to the governor's race and the supermajority fight in our state elections in terms of the significance, not just for the next couple of years, but really for the next decade or the rest of my life. If Republicans get unilateral power to control the rules over which votes are counted and how they're counted and how they're cast, they can rig the system so that they can never lose power. But if we have someone who believes in our constitutional guarantee that voters should have equal rights in our state, win the state Supreme Court race in April 4th of 2023, that person could be the deciding vote on a ruling to strike down the gerrymandered maps, and Wisconsin could become like Michigan, where they had fair maps in this election, and in a year when Democrats win in the statewide races, they'd also win a trifecta at the state legislative level and be able to write the values of the public into the law instead of the extreme MAGA minority. So this really is a race for all the marbles, and the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, we are keeping dozens of staff on our payroll, on our team, to make sure we're ready for a state Supreme Court fight that we're going to have to prosecute like a statewide, national stakes, incredibly important election.
I think it's bizarre that judges are elected to begin with, but that's a discussion for another day. Let me ask you this, Ben. In Michigan, you mentioned they just flipped all the chambers, first time since, I think, 1982. They have the trifecta now in Michigan under fair, independent maps. These weren't gerrymandered maps by the Democrats. This was, let's run under a fair map and see who wins, and the Democrats won. That was also through a petition, a ballot initiative last time round that got this independent redistricting committee. Is that an option for Wisconsin to go down that road?
I wish it were. Under Wisconsin's constitution, a bill has to pass, a constitutional amendment has to pass through two successive sessions of the state legislature before it can go in front of voters. So there is no path for direct democracy here to be able to fix the maps. Governor Evers proposed creating a referendum process, and of course our Republican gerrymandered legislature just struck it down. They gavelled in and gavelled out of a special session in less than a minute. So the one path, it's like the Avengers movies where there's only one path to defeat Thanos. The one path is to win the majority on our state Supreme Court, strike down the gerrymandered maps. And I should say, if anyone wants to support that work, they can go to wisdems.org/donate. We'd be deeply grateful.
Yeah, in Avengers Endgame, Ben, Tony Stark found a way to travel through time. I would challenge Tony Stark to find a way around these Wisconsin maps of yours. That would be a challenge for any genius. Let me ask you this, though, Ben, before we run out of time. There's no question these gerrymanders are ridiculous. They hurt your party. But that's not your only issue in Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes ran statewide. You can't blame his defeat on gerrymandering. Why did he go down to someone like Ron Johnson, election denier, anti-vaxxer? Pretty bad for the Democrats in Wisconsin.
It's very, very painful, especially because he came closer to defeating Ron Johnson than anyone ever has. This was the closest Senate race in 100 years in Wisconsin. A Democrat hasn't defeated a sitting Republican senator since 1962, 60 years ago. And in that year, we had a president with a 70% approval rating. Mandela Barnes did extraordinarily well. But the most painful thing was that Ron Johnson's biggest legislative achievement was giving a massive tax cut to the biggest funders of the entire conservative movement, Dick and Liz Uihlein and Diane Hendricks, another Wisconsin billionaire. They got about $500 million in tax deductions thanks to a law that Ron Johnson wrote. And they in turn funded a $29 million attack ad campaign against Mandela Barnes.
It is Friday, the 18th of November of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Okay, well, we are entering into a new era, and that new era, as you know, is one that does not have Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, or currently, currently she still is Speaker, but she will be just representing her district in the House, and that being San Francisco, by the way. So maybe not a leadership position anywhere. The mantle has been passed to the younger generations, and that's a good thing. Just because it's the irrevocable change that we expect here in this world. But sad to see her step down. I believe that she would still be the most effective Speaker of the House ever in the history of the United States, and I might say not even the most effective, but the best. And I cannot get it out of my head that the main reason that she is stepping down, especially now that the Republicans have taken over the House and are going to do their politics of chaos, she would have been, as Speaker, quite a bulwark against that. Not to belittle anything that Hakeem Jeffries will be able to do, but I cannot get it out of my head that the reason that she stepped down ultimately is because her husband's head got bashed in with a skull by a maggot who was encouraged by the maggots to go get Nancy. And he couldn't find Nancy, so he bashed in the head of her husband with a hammer. And immediately, the repug maggots went on the airwaves and made a joke about it, belittled it, made it into one of their cynical conspiracies. And they continue with it now. Kevin McCarthy couldn't find it within himself to go and sit and watch Nancy hand over the mantle step down from her leadership position. Talk about comity. We're supposed to reach across the aisle with these people. It is impossible to negotiate with terrorists. That's why we've had this axiom, do not negotiate with terrorists. Now, that doesn't mean that they can go get elected, and that's exactly what happened. Marjorie Taylor Greene was actually brought to court to prevent her from running in her district because she took part in an insurrection against the United States of America, and it continues right to this very moment. And a judge ruled that the people bringing the lawsuit didn't have standing, so therefore he ruled against them. And she's not the only one. Others weren't necessarily brought to court. Now, on more local stages, there have been a few who actually have been ruled that they can never run for office ever again because of their participation in January 6th. But we have a Marjorie Taylor Greene who, because by the mere fact that the GOP is able to hold the House with less than a handful of votes in their favor, or members in their favor, are going to go all in because that's what they do. We can say they don't have a mandate, but that doesn't matter. They will triple, quadruple down. They want to impeach Joe Biden. Not because of a crime, but for get back, because we impeached Donald Trump twice. They argue that, unlike Adam Schiff and all the others there, they're going to bring facts, actual evidence to prove their point. Well, let me bring up a little fact about Hunter's laptop, for instance. How can it be used when the chain of command was usurped? How can it be used when entries were made after it was in custody? These are all in court filings. But they can go out in front of the public and talk about how corrupt Joe Biden is and Hunter Biden is and their international business empire that apparently no one knows about anywhere. No country is trying to tax him. You know, countries tried to tax Donald Trump. How is it that a guy that we know has international business interests and probably a lot of graft, a lot of bribery, a lot of extortion, a lot of corruption, but it's Joe Biden who has some sort of international cartel? And they're going to expose it. Sounds to me that someone's going to be indicted, and this is their response. Which brings us to Elon Musk. What was going on in Elon Musk's life when he finally pulled the trigger and plopped down $44 billion of not his money, by the way. Part of it is money, but nonetheless. He was already being taken to task, and when I say taken to task, I mean taken to court over flaws in his Tesla vehicles. You know, the kind that suddenly lurch into the center divider and explode. He was already under investigation for stock manipulation. His pay package at Tesla, $55 billion a year. That's a lot of accessories on that Tesla to get to that amount every year. Mm-hmm. But we also, because of discovery in these various lawsuits that Ellen was under, we come to find out he has no STEM degrees. He doesn't have an engineering degree. He's not an engineer. He hasn't invented anything. He hasn't built anything. He's bought a bunch of stuff. His fortune was made from the family apartheid blood emerald fortune or enterprise. That's where his fortune began and grew from there. He tried to strong-arm people at Stanford to write letters that, oh yeah, I was enrolled. He dropped out. They don't have any record of him. He does not have a physics degree. What he does have that he calls a physics degree is one made up. He did not invent Tesla. He bought the company. He did not invent SpaceX. He bought the company. But there is a dynamic among rich people, and that could be anybody, just a mere shop owner. They think because of their success, supposed success, in the world of economics, they have the secret of the universe at their fingertips. All they have to do is snap their fingers, and there it is. What they say and believe has much more bearing than what the rest of us do. We're just the hoi polloi, if that. So Twitter, being the most effective investigative tool, the greatest disseminator of the news, good, fake, or otherwise. If you're the richest man in the world and you want to shut off that spigot, what would you do? When it's going to come out that the boards and the shareholders are all going to find out that you've been a sham and you've lied about your past and you shouldn't have even been here because when you dropped out of Stanford, you were here illegally as an illegal alien. Deport Elon Musk. So it's okay. Twitter was around during the uprising in Tunisia. Remember that? The Orange Revolution? Some believe that that would never have happened if it hadn't been for the social media platform. What was the first thing Tunisia did when, the new boss, just like the old boss, they started working to shut down that Twitter feed, or at least constrain it. And they did. Now they're under the thumb of an authoritarian. Peter Thiel and Elon Musk were conferring during this time, just before Elon made his hostile takeover entreaties, while he was under intense court pressure. Peter Thiel had already brought down Gawker because they, quote, exposed that he was a homosexual like no one in Silicon Valley knew. But he had bigger aspirations, and being exposed, I guess, as a homosexual might not fare well in the where he wanted to be. So he brought down Gawker. If you were the richest man in the world and you had no moral center, and the pressure was getting too great, finds out that your supposed PhD isn't really real, that you even lied about being in the United States when you shouldn't have been here, or at least tried to do something legal to stay, and yet whine about everything, all the right-wing tropes that you can come up with, Elon Musk is whining about now. Just the rote hypocrisy. Let's bring down Twitter. That way, people won't know. That's how small minds work. That's how bullies work. And I suppose when you have a bunch of money and you have no moral fiber and you've made a pact with the devil, I'm looking at you, Peter Thiel. These things are going to happen. He doesn't want anyone remote working, but they locked all the doors at Twitter headquarters there on Market Street. Now, it may have been a foobar, because he did fire the people that ran the badges to be, the badge software, so that when people scan their badges, then they're let in through the front door. Fired all of them. Then he's out there begging them to come back. Yeah, they're going to do it. We're going to work hardcore. Jesus. I'll tell you what's hardcore. Is that Twitter can be resurrected because of the people that work there that no longer do. there's already been some suggestions, which I have already made, and that was months ago. In fact, even longer than that. Even, before Ellen made his hostile takeover demands, Jack had been talking about stepping down, and I thought it would be great to maybe turn Twitter into a public trust. Or at least we could go with the Green Bay Packer model, where the people of Green Bay own the Packers. Buy a share. Maybe now is the time to do that. Maybe it's already being put in place, possibly. In the meantime, I'm not going anywhere. It was rather sketchy last night. Trying to tweet, things would just freeze up. And I thought maybe it was because I had too many cookies or whatever in my PC, but that wasn't the case because all other sites were loading and operating smoothly. But Twitter was rather sketchy and jumpy. And that might be because, they're going to find out that there's an engineer who knows about a forgotten switch and a forgotten server farm somewhere in BF, Iowa. And he has to manually reset that to keep the whole works going, and now he doesn't work there anymore, or she. So it could stop down and we might see the fail whale again. Remember when Twitter first started, it was failing all the time. We had the fail whale. I haven't seen that in a while. Maybe we will again. It'll be like good old times. Well, I don't like the bad old times, and the good old times aren't necessarily that good. Why don't we make some better times? And Musk might not be part of that construct. We can only hope. All right, let's get on with what we have curated. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, what we have curated for you today. I should mention, here's some personal news I need to tell you. We're finally getting those doors that were purchased all the way back in February. Convinced my elderly mom, they'll be put in a couple of weeks. Here it is, almost the end of November, and we're getting them put in. So, well, not the end, but, it's past the middle. And they will be installed today, so that's great. And it's going to be right around the time of when the show ends. So let's hope they don't start banging beforehand, because I might have to tear away, and we can't do that. So what do we have curated for you today? Of course, at the top, GOP redistricting is undermining democracy in the state legislatures. And, that's a given, but was good for Mehdi to spell it out even more succinctly. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approved a plan to demolish 4 dams on the Lower Klamath River that would be the largest dam removal and river restoration project in the world. A federal judge in Florida issued a temporary injunction against the Ron DeSantis Stop Woke Act in a ruling that called the legislation positively dystopian. And Starbucks workers went on strike at more than 100 U.S. stores. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where thousands of people marched through central Athens to mark the anniversary of the 1973 student uprising. And Vice President Harris has arrived in Thailand for the Asia-Pacific Summit. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. we burn through so much time there, and it is Friday, so we are allowed. I'm just going to forego the usuals, except to remind you that the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln is at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, along with our Patreon link, and please help us pay our bills because we need the help. You can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, thanks, and he's busy archiving the Netroots Radio tweets over these many years, and I'm going to have to do mine too, I guess. Get them archived. And you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West on Twitter. Follow me at Justice Putnam on Twitter. And the show notes and links diary is at Daily Codes. You can find that if you follow me at Justice Putnam. And pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fabulous Blue Moon Spirits Fridays is by Jillian Flaccus at the Associated Press. U.S. regulators approved a plan yesterday, Thursday, to demolish 4 dams on a California river and open up hundreds of miles of salmon habitat that would be the largest dam removal and river restoration project in the world when it goes forward. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's unanimous vote on the Lower Klamath River dams is the last major regulatory hurdle and the biggest milestone for a $500 million demolition proposal championed by Native American tribes and environmentalists for years. The project would return the lower half of California's second-largest river to a free-flowing state for the first time in more than a century. Native tribes that rely on the Klamath River and its salmon for their way of life have been a driving force behind bringing the dams down in a wild and remote area that spans the California and Oregon border. Barring any unforeseen complications, Oregon, California, and the entity formed to oversee the project will accept the license transfer and could begin dam removal as early as this summer. The Klamath salmon are coming home, UREC Chairman Joseph James said after the vote. The people have earned this victory, and with it, we carry on our sacred duty to fish that have sustained our people since the beginning of time. The dams produce less than 2% of Pacific Corp's power generation, enough to power about 70,000 homes when they are running at full capacity. But they often run at a far lower capacity because of low water in the river and other issues. And the agreement that paved the way for yesterday's vote was ultimately a business decision, Bob Gravely, spokesperson for the utility, said. Oh, well, that's a nice way of saving face, I guess. Pacific Corp would have had to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in fish ladders, fish screens, and other conservation upgrades under environmental regulations that were not in place when the aging dams were first built. But with the deal approved, the utility's cost is capped at $200 million, with another $250 million from a California voter-approved water bond. We're closing coal plants and building wind farms, and it all just has to add up in the end. It's not a one-on-one, he said, of the coming dam demolition. You can make up that power by the way you operate the rest of your facilities, or having energy efficiency having energy efficiency savings so your customers are losing less. Approval of the order to surrender the dam's operating license is the bedrock of the most ambitious salmon restoration plan in history, and the project scope, measured by the number of dams and the amount of river habitat that would open to salmon, makes it the largest of its kind in the world, said Amy Sowers-Kober, spokesperson for American Rivers, which monitors dam removals and advocates for river restoration. Anthony Izagiri of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A federal judge in Florida yesterday, Thursday, blocked a law pushed by Ron DeSantis that restricts certain race-based conversations and analysis in colleges. Tallahassee U.S. District Judge Mark Walker issued a temporary injunction against the so-called Stop Woke Act in a ruling that called the legislation positively dystopian. The law prohibits teaching or business practices that contend members of one ethnic group are inherently racist and should feel guilt for past actions committed by others. It also bars the notion that a person's status as privileged or oppressed is necessarily determined by their race or gender, or that discrimination is acceptable to achieve diversity. Our professors are critical to a healthy democracy, and the state of Florida's decision to choose which viewpoints are worthy of illumination and which must remain in the shadows has implications for us all, Walker wrote. If our priests of democracy are not allowed to shed light on challenging ideas, then democracy will die in darkness. The ruling is at least a temporary setback for the powerful Republican governor's agenda to combat what he describes as the woke ideology of liberals and critical race theory, a way of thinking about America's history through the lens of racism. DeSantis won a landslide re-election to a second term this month after a campaign that focused heavily on cultural issues. You know, racism, bigotry, all the things that they like. The governor has often said, rulings that halt his legislative priorities are likely to be reversed by appeals courts in Florida that are generally more conservative. A spokesman for DeSantis said they would appeal the ruling to a favorable judge in Florida, apparently. The Stop Woke Act protects the open exchange of ideas by prohibiting teachers or employers who hold agency over others from forcing discriminatory concepts on students as part of classroom instruction or on employees as a condition of maintaining employment, said Brian Griffin, DeSantis's press secretary. In his lengthy ruling, Walker quoted from George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984, writing, "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13, and the powers in charge of Florida's public university system have declared the state has unfettered authority to muzzle its professors in the name of freedom." Judge Walker in August issued a similar ruling on the law that blocked it from taking effect in businesses. The law is also subject to another legal challenge from a group of K-12 teachers and a student. Durbin of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Starbucks workers at more than 100 U.S. stores went on strike yesterday, Thursday, in their largest labor action since a campaign to unionize the company's stores began late last year. The walkouts coincided with Starbucks' annual Red Cup Day, when the company gives free reusable cups to customers who order a holiday drink. Workers say it's often one of the busiest days of the year. Starbucks declined to say how many red cups it plans to distribute. Workers say they're seeking better pay, more consistent schedules, and higher staffing levels in busy stores. Stores in 25 states plan to take part in the labor action, according to Starbucks Workers United, the group organizing the effort. Strikers are handing out their own red cups with union logos. Starbucks, which opposes the unionization effort, said it is aware of the walkouts and respects its employees' right to lawfully protest, which means they're going to get fired as soon as no one's looking. Some workers plan to picket all day, while others will do shorter walkouts. The union said the goal was to shut down stores during the strikes and noted that the company usually has difficulty staffing during Red Cup Day because it is so busy. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, privilege. There's plenty about that in the more usual sense in James Gray's latest, Armageddon Time, which I'll get to. But consider for a moment director's privilege. There's no rule saying that important directors' early lives are necessarily more interesting than those of the rest of us, but they sure get made into movies more often. The respect we have for these folks stems from their ability to weave a story, so what could be more bankable, literally, in Hollywood than a successful director doing his or her own coming-of-age story? Think Lady Bird, last year's Saccharine Belfast, or Licorice Pizza, though that was based on the story of an industry friend of a big director. Armageddon Time is a several-month slice of the life of New York Jewish-American sixth-grader, stand-in Paul Graff, growing up in the just pre-Reagan era. In fact, the movie takes its name from a dumb comment made in an interview with Reagan and is suffused start to finish with snippets of the Clash's cover of Armageddon Time. Paul lives with the aspirational dreams of his family, which he does not share, before he's jerked out of public school for hijinks undertaken with an African-American friend, Johnny, and sent to a private school, which sports as two of its funders, Fred and Marianne Trump, who actually speak, as if their presence doesn't say it all. Paul's parents despise Reagan and, despite being fine-tuned to anti-Semitism, are pretty racist themselves, though Paul's dad seems vaguely troubled by an incident starkly portraying what we'd now call white privilege involving his son and the black friend. The cast, including Jeremy Strong, Anne Hathaway, Anthony Hopkins, and especially young Banks Rapetta, lately of The Black Phone, keep Armageddon Time real, even gritty sometimes, and though it flirts with heavy-handedness in his politics, doesn't drown in them. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Arthritis is common among veterans. Traumatic and overuse injuries during active duty are risk factors for developing arthritis. Fortunately, there are low-cost or no-cost strategies that can help veterans manage arthritis. Physical activity can reduce pain and improve function. It can also help improve mood and play a role in managing other chronic conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. You can do low-impact activities, such as walking, biking, swimming, and water aerobics, all good forms of exercise. Arthritis-specific classes can help you get started. Information on classes, exercise programs, and tools are available at cdc.gov/arthritis. These resources can help reduce pain and improve function. Learning self-management techniques can help all veterans become more active, improve their overall quality of life, and thrive.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. Probably okay. I opened the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hit him well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
America's political, corporate, and media establishments were cocksure about their prognostications that a powerful red wave was about to hit America in this month's elections. It would sweep Democrats out and push Republicans into office all across America, they exclaimed. How shocking and embarrassing, then, that their raging wave turned out to be just a little ripple. Republicans ran poorly and many Democrats ran well. Still, the Democratic Party as a whole should have done better if its don't-rock-the-boat leadership had been gutsier, more progressive, and, yes, more democratic. Well, murmur the party's Washington hierarchy, we can't get too far ahead of the people. Really? Why not ask the people themselves? That's the virtue of the ballot initiative system. It allows grassroots groups to put issues up for a vote, rather than letting the public agenda be controlled by a clique of lobbyists, legislatures, and party line followers. This year, there were 132 of these initiatives on the ballots in 37 states, and more on local ballots. And vote after vote showed that the people are way ahead of the political insiders in support of strong progressive policies. By big margins, 3 states said to hell with a Republican Supreme Court enshrining women's abortion rights in their state constitutions. South Dakota, supposedly a right-wing bastion, shoved their GOP governor and legislators aside to expand Medicaid health coverage to the state's low-income families. In bright red Nebraska, nearly 60% of voters said yes to a $15 minimum wage. A big majority in Illinois amended the state constitution to guarantee collective bargaining rights for workers. 70% of New Mexico voters made funding of early childhood education a constitutional requirement. This is Jim Hightower saying, for more information, go to ballotpedia.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day that workers at the General Motors plant in Atlanta, Georgia, participated in a sit-down strike. This was part of a wave of labor organizing during the 1930s. Other General Motors plants in Kansas City and Cleveland went on strike. The most famous sit-down strike occurred in December in Flint, Michigan, where striking workers occupied General Motors plants for more than 40 days. The goal of these strikes was to unionize under the auspices of the United Auto Workers Union. The United Auto Workers was founded in May of 1935 in Detroit, Michigan. The union was initially part of the American Federation of Labor. However, when John L. Lewis formed the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the UAW left the AFL to join the new Labor Federation. This strategy was first used by CIO rubber workers in February and March of 1936. While it is believed that IWW members at the General Electric Works in Schenectady, New York, were the first to sit down as they protested the firings of 3 fellow IWW members in 1906, the CIO mastered the tactic of the sit-down strike. The method was effective, because when workers sat down on the job, management was hesitant to use force to evict them. They worried about damaging production equipment. The sit-down also made bringing in scab labor very difficult. A 1939 Supreme Court decision effectively ended most sit-down strikes in the United States.
Come away with me, Lucille, in my merry old mobile. Down the road of life we'll fly, automobile bubbling, you and I.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 28 degrees Fahrenheit under foggy conditions. Expecting to be just a tad warmer than yesterday. We were in the low 50s, expecting to be in the mid 50s today. Areas of patchy fog early. Some clouds this morning will give way to generally sunny skies in the afternoon. Winds will be out of the east at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the mid to upper 20s, winds light and variable. And then generally sunny tomorrow with highs in the mid 50s, winds light and variable. And then Sunday looks about the same, and we should be getting some rain coming in on Monday, and with quite a bit more on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Pollen is rated as none here in the town of Rogue River itself. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the moderate range at 62 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.37 inches. Visibility is only at a quarter mile, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 52 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 53 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 66 and fair. Kyiv is 30 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 45 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 55 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 54 degrees with rain showers. San Francisco, California is 46 degrees, partly cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York, New York is 40 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Thousands of people marched yesterday, Thursday, through central Athens, accompanied by a heavy police presence, to mark the anniversary of a 1973 student uprising that was brutally crushed by Greece's military dictatorship at the time. The anniversary is observed each year with marches from Athens Polytechnic University to the U.S. Embassy and have often, though not always, turned violent. Yesterday's march was peaceful. However, clashes broke out at a similar march in the northern city of Thessaloniki to the U.S. consulate, with a small group of demonstrators throwing Molotov cocktails and rocks at riot police, who responded with tear gas and stun grenades. In Athens, the demonstration was led, as it is each year, by a group carrying a blood-stained Greek flag from the 1973 uprising to the embassy to protest Washington's support of the dictatorship in Greece at the time. Large crowds followed, while riot police stood by, guarding official buildings and other sites, and a police helicopter flew overhead. In 1973, the military regime in power in Greece since 1967 sent police and troops to crush student-led pro-democracy protests centered in the Athens Polytechnic. Officers opened fire on unarmed demonstrators and bystanders, and an army tank smashed through the gates of the Polytechnic, behind which many students had gathered. At least 20 people are believed to have been killed, although the exact death toll of the November 1973 events has never been definitively determined. The uprising was followed by a putsch within the junta, bringing even more hard-lined officers to power. Democracy was restored in Greece in July of 1974 after the dictatorship collapsed in the face of a Turkish invasion of Cyprus, provoked by the junta's own machinations aiming to unite the island with Greece.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Kritika Patti of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris arrived yesterday, Thursday, in Thailand, where she plans to affirm America's commitment to Southeast Asia and drive home the message that the region can count on the United States. Harris's visit for a two-day Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit comes just after U.S. President Joe Biden attended a Southeast Asian Summit in Cambodia and Group of 20 meetings in Indonesia. She and other APEC leaders are expected to discuss the Ukraine war, soaring inflation, food and energy shortages, and a more assertive China. Chinese President Xi Jinping is also attending the summit, which is taking place in a heavily guarded venue in Bangkok. Harris is standing in for Biden, who returned to Washington to host his granddaughter's wedding at the White House. A senior U.S. administration official said the trips to Southeast Asia by Biden and Harris show the deepening of America's engagement with the region and that it is a friend and partner that can be counted on. The official spoke on condition of anonymity in order to speak more freely. Harris will also deliver a speech to a business conference on the summit sidelines. Officials said she will outline priorities for next year's APEC summit, which the U.S. will host. Leaders of the 21 countries and territories in APEC, whose official mission is to promote regional economic integration, are meeting formally in closed-door sessions today and Saturday. Most of APEC's work is technical and incremental, carried out by senior officials and cabinet ministers covering areas such as trade, tourism, forestry, health, food, security, small and medium-sized enterprises, and women's empowerment. Over the weekend, Harris will hold talks with Thai Prime Minister Chan Ocha that are expected to focus on expanding cooperation on climate change, clean energy, and sustainable development. They may also discuss the situation in Myanmar, where violence has escalated since the military seized power last year. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.